the stages of grief is a model that we sort of hear about in society. And so when that model took off, it was never intended for the people who survived the loss. However, that is coined in society, but it is absolutely a myth. Grief is non-linear. It is not a stage-wise progression. If anything, it's a combination of all the things included in that model and so much more. Certainly more of an ebb and flowing of grief and unpredictability as opposed to a linear process.
Hey, I'm Tanya Wilkinson, and this is Death on the Daily, bringing the conversation about death out of the shadows and into the mainstream. Because along with birth and change, if there's one thing that's going to happen to us all, then death is it. And we're going to explore how death actually shows up for us on the daily in a multitude of ways, and how when we allow ourselves to accept and to be with death, how it can teach us a whole heap about how to live this life well. In a world of always on, always doing, always filling up our days with so much noise, we each have an invitation to soften, to be, to find stillness, even if just for 1 minute at a time. For it's here in our stillness, and as we sit with our grief and that which is difficult and painful, that we can uncover understanding, meaning, and clarity for our forwards path. And for most of us, myself included, this softness and stillness, it takes practice. I mean, for me, a lifelong practice. And my guest today guides us to really soften in our grief, as well as driving change in work culture, empowering a reconnection to humanity that is so, so needed in a world where corporates really do see us as more machines than human. Dr. Mekel Harris is a licensed psychologist who helps grieving hearts to reimagine their life after loss. She's also the author of Relaxing into the Pain and is a TEDx speaker. So Mekel, welcome to Death on the Daily.
Thank you, Tanya. It is a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the invitation.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be here with you. And let's dive straight into you and your story. And obviously, I mean, I think for pretty much for all of us who have grief as a part of our purpose in our work, there is obviously grief and loss at the heart of our stories. Mm-hmm. And since 2012, I know you've been through a lot of loss. Mm-hmm. So, it's probably a big question to ask to start out to say, share everything. So I'd say, please bring into this space any parts of your story and how grief became a part of your story that you wish to.
So life leading up to 2012 was relatively seamless and smooth. I was sort of climbing the professional ladder. I had a wonderful social circle, wonderful family. And in 2011, my mom, who I was extremely close to, she was my prayer partner, my confidant, my shopping buddy, my BFF, all these things in one. She started to notice some changes in her health. She suffered a series of mini strokes. I was living in LA at the time. She was in Texas. And at the time, my mom just exhibited such resiliency over her life that I thought, okay, these are blips on the screen. She'll recover and she'll be back to who I know to be my mom. However, in November 2012, she called and said that something was different, that she had driven herself to the emergency room, at which time they discovered jaundice, which is that yellowing of her eyes. She knew that something was impacting her liver. My mom was a nurse, so she knew that. And after a series of tests, they confirmed a diagnosis of stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And so from that specific day to the day she died was 30 days. And that was the beginning of the entry into this portal that we call grieving. And it definitely opened my life up to a space that I had never experienced before.
That is, I'm so sorry for your loss. And what's your mum's name?
Patricia Ann Harris.
Patricia Ann Harris. Always love to bring our beloved departers' names into this space.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And obviously it's over a decade since her loss. Mm-hmm. And I mean, grief is lifelong, but in our society, there's such a misconception, isn't there, that we get over our grief and that we move on without it.
Yes, and actually, I want to speak to that because I think that even though the stages of grief is a model that we sort of hear about in society, just as a little bit of a fun fact, that particular model was actually coined by Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She was a Swiss psychiatrist, and these were based on her observations of people who were dying. She noticed that when they learned about their own impending death, that they exhibited shock and eventually reached a place of acceptance. And so when that model took off, it was never intended for the people who survived the loss. However, that is coined in society, but it is absolutely a myth. Grief is non-linear. It is not a stage-wise progression. If anything, it's a combination of all the things included in that model and so much more. Um, Certainly more of an ebb and flowing of grief and unpredictability as opposed to a linear process.
Mekel, thank you so much for sharing that, because I mean, grief is confusing enough
It
in
is.
general. I could imagine, even with when you come at it as a grief expert, you go. I remember actually speaking with Megan Reardon Jarvis, and
Mhm.
said, when you go through grief, it brings up so much. It takes you to a whole other planet.
It
So
does.
that does so much damage for us as a society, doesn't it? When it's
It
just, oh
does.
yeah, these are the stages, you go through it. And
Mhm.
am I right in thinking? I swear I heard somewhere that Dr. Kubler Ross was trying, even to her sort of her deathbed, to say this is not for this is not
That's right.
a
No,
one size fits all. It's actually not intended for your average person who's
that's right.
grieving someone who they love.
Yeah, she did her professional due diligence to try to undo what society had done to sort of run the wrong direction with her model. And there's since been some additional iterations and a lot of articles written about that. Yeah, grief is very complex, and I think that's what makes it difficult in our society. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we live in a world that's very biomedical, meaning that we want to sort of retrofit grief into a medical frame. For example, we experience a stub of our toe, right? It's bleeding. We go to the emergency room. They tend to it, stitch it up, give us some medication, and then we walk away. And then weeks later, there's no evidence of that particular injury, right? If only grief looked like that. But I think as a society, we want it to be biomedical when it's not. It's
Hmm.
complex, it's unique to the individual. There are cultural overlays that influence how people express their grief and manifest it. And so we've got to be really careful as we interact with people who are grieving to make sure we're meeting them where they are at an individual level.
Yes, meeting them where they are is so important. So important. I think you described so beautifully, obviously, that medicalization, and we've just got that rush to try and fix things. And if we can't fix things, and my experience is definitely that people just don't, they almost disappear and they just won't talk about it.
That's right. Yeah, we live in a very pain avoidant society. And so as people who are supporting those who grieve, it's important to remember that, pain, even though grief is invisible a lot of the times, it's an internal processing and sort of manifestation of our pain. We can't always see it. That's why we've got to be, as a supporter, present, right? To witness the moments when grief does reveal itself, right? That is a powerful, powerful tool to use. It's just your presence. There's no fixing it, there's no undoing it, and there's no getting over it. But to be able to sit with someone who is in the depth of their pain and say, gosh, I see it too, right? Is a really powerful gift.
The power of presence. It's so simple. Actually, was literally WhatsApp voice noting with a friend the other day who listened to one of my podcast episodes about presence,
Uh
and
huh.
he voice noted me to say, "How can I be more present with my family? I'm going to enjoy the Easter weekend, and I
Yeah.
really want to make sure that I'm there. I'm all in." So,
Yeah.
for anyone like him, what would your advice be of how can we be more present? How can we show up more for those who are grieving?
I think one of the things is to sort of set in your mind that grief can't be fixed, right? One of the most excruciating things in life, even as a licensed psychologist, is to sit with people in the depth of their pain, to visibly watch someone's entire countenance change from one that is composed to completely falling apart. And you're sitting in the room, and of course, there's this reflex that you have to want to stop that or to want them to feel comforted in some way. What I've learned though is that allowing it and even walking into that space with them, not that you're making it about you, but you're allowing maybe your own eyes to well up with tears to let the person know, gosh, I see it too. I see that this is excruciating is really powerful. And we've got to get better doing that. So I think one of the things is to set your mind that you can't fix it. Secondly, is to eliminate distractions, right? So when someone is having a bad experience, one of the temptations may be to not look at them, right? Because it's so painful for you to maybe get on your phone because that's going to offer some sort of comfort or to physically walk away because of your own internal distress. And so I think part of it is practicing, even in small, minute 1 to 2 minutes, right? Sitting
Mhm.
with something that feels uncomfortable to know that you can lean into it, knowing that over time you'll be able to lean in even more and even more and even more with the person, and they will benefit from that perspective.
Oh, Mikhail, I love that. Presence really is a practice, but also being with the uncomfortable
That's
is
right.
such a practice. I think that there's so much that we humans need to practice in this world because
Yeah.
we really got disconnected from the core of a lot of our empathy, a lot of our presence, a lot of
Right.
our being there. We live in the age of distraction, the age of numbing. And I think as you shared so powerfully, I mean, I really took into my heart when you said it's uncomfortable, it's difficult for you.
I'll add here that I think it starts with us, right? So think about your own experience to your friend. Think about your own experience. And when you experience your own internal pain, what are you doing? Are you numbing out with podcasts? Are you numbing out by social interactions? Are you numbing out with drugs, alcohol, sex, work, whatever it is? Be able to sit with yourself as the first practice and try to elongate the time that you can sit with your own pain, right? That will also prime you to be able to sit with other people's pain for lengthier amounts of time.
Wow. Wow, I love that. Personal practice first and then create that ripple effect out into the world. That's so beautiful, so powerful. And I think actually when we look inwards, I've continued to have reckonings with myself where I know I'm numbing out. I know I'm feeling my grief and I'm like, oh, I've been on my phone on Instagram for the whole of a morning or whatever it is, or to your point around podcasts, filling every second with noise, including literally when I'm going to use the bathroom, I just put a podcast on because I can't be with myself. So I think that can be quite a shock for us. And that's where that practice, that commitment is so beautiful.
I remember the first time that I practiced stillness, which I'll sort of share. I didn't do this because I was grieving. I was practicing it more as a spiritual discipline to be able to sort of tune into the voice of God. But I remember the first time I did it. This was years ago. And I was so fidgety, Tanya. I mean, I'm talking about a minute, but
Yeah.
about 10 seconds in, I'm feeling squirmy. I can't sit still. My mind's ping ponging all over the place. And I just felt like I just had this huge urge to want to get up and do something.
Hmm.
And that is when I, in that moment, heard the voice of God say, I want to spend time with you. Like, be still, right? There's a scripture in the Bible that says, be still and know that I'm God. And in the moment, I felt like it was a summoning back. Not that it was easy. It wasn't like I heard the voice and I thought, okay, no problem. But I wrestled with it. But the more I've practiced it, I have been able to now be able to sit for, 15, 20 minutes in just complete stillness. Not that my mind doesn't go other places, but the fidgety, restless part of me is no longer there, and that was cultivated through daily disciplines and practice. And it's the same thing that we can do for ourselves as we grieve and support people who are grieving.
Oh, wow, I can resonate so much with that. I remember the point in time when I went, "You know what? Nike says just do it. I'm gonna just do nothing." And then I realized it's not that easy.
It's
And
not
when
that
I was looking at these weekends of just doing nothing again, I was like, "Oh, my just doing nothing was overscheduling, and I'm gonna do this YouTube video of yoga, and that's not doing nothing. That's not literally sitting and
That's
just
right.
being with yourself. So I can really, really, really resonate with
Yeah.
that. And I think, yeah, our sort of short attention spans that have been all conditioned through the virtual world and everything,
Mhm.
there is a bit, I think there's a big reconnection that can happen. And to your point, that is when that connection to God, or that connection to your intuition, and it can really, that wisdom can speak through. And we, yeah, if we fill our days with noise and also other people's noise through scrolling, etc., we don't allow ourselves that space to really say, actually, there's a heart in here that's got so much within it that wants to express itself.
I remember after my mom died, so I was, working in part-time private practice when she died, and that was in December 2012. So I went back to school. I was working in academia as well. So I was a professor, working with students, but I also had this part-time private practice. And there was a point in time where I had to put that on pause, the practice, because it was so dysregulating emotionally to, number one, be walking through it for myself, also navigating life as a career professional in academia. That was its own stress. Then to sit with people who were grieving, it just became so much that I really had to put that on pause for about 9 months, so that I could understand what was coming up for me, right? That way, when I returned to my clients, not to say that grief didn't emerge in the space, but I was able to recognize it, and it became a way for me to connect with my clients as opposed to me making that space about me, which would have been the case if I had dove right back into it.
Yeah, so powerful, giving yourself that space. I always think of it like the cocoon. We go like
Yeah.
the little caterpillar, we need that time in the cocoon before then emerging as that
Mhm.
transformed butterfly.
Oh, I love the butterfly, Tanya. Oh, yeah, such a beautiful metaphor for
Oh,
so much of life. Absolutely.
yeah. Yeah, it is, isn't it? Just flutter those wings and be like, I've emerged and now I can support and hold that space for others. But I'd imagine as well, and I know that a lot of your work in grief as well, you do work with corporates, but I'd
Mhm.
imagine for a lot of us actually there isn't that space because I mean the bereavement leave I know in the US is terrible, in the UK much the same. So
Mhm.
I'd love to hear anything as well around your thoughts there of where do we need to go as a society to give that space for our grief to be able to be fully held and processed before I
Mhm.
suppose we reemerge out of that cocoon back into, I guess, business as usual,
Yeah.
as you might say.
Well, first, thank you for mentioning the other work that I do. So, I'm a co founder of a company called Bloomwell Partners. And the mission of our organization is to help cultivate and sort of equip leaders and managers and organizations to be able to offer grief informed support to employees who are grieving. But what I'll say is, I think that we have to really normalize. This is going to sound very simplistic. We really need to remember and normalize our humanity. I don't know what it is, Tanya. There's something about society that forgets that we are human. We're not robots, right? Yes, we have routines. Our alarm goes off. We get up. A lot of us drive in a car. We go someplace. We do something for 8 hours or 10 hours or 12 hours. And then we automatically come back on autopilot back to our homes. But we forget that at the core of who we are is a human being, right? The being part. And that's really what we try to remind leaders who, because of their role, are doing a lot of things, right? It's a mindset shift from doing to being. And I think when we can sort of drop back into our bodies, when we can look around the room and instead of seeing people as sort of vessels of productivity, right? Sort of focused on the doing and see them as other human beings in the space, then I think it softens us up to be able to realize, gosh, we don't need more things or tasks. So we need to look each other in the eye. We need to ask, how are you today? Not in a bypass way in the elevator, like, oh, how was your weekend as our feet are continuing to move, but really look eyeball to eyeball and say, "How are you today?" And stop and allow whatever comes up in the space before our feet start moving, right? So it's just a reminder of our humanity.
You got me thinking, actually. I think the predominant question from all of my time in corporate was always one time of the week, Monday, how was your weekend? I can't really connect into many or any time. I'm maybe the odd person, but on the whole, that how are you? The simplicity of it, and that holding that space. And equally, I can call myself out when I was manager of, if anyone's sick or if anyone goes off on bereavement leave, there's so much work that there always was that, oh, okay, when are they coming back? And I can
That's
call
right.
myself out for that lack of empathy.
Yeah, I think that we're just programmed to focus on productivity, especially in large organizations. And but we all need the reminder. I mean, as a psychologist, there are moments I still sort of have to remind myself, gosh, I am not a human doing. I'm a human being, right? And so I've got to really focus on that first. And it really is when we're able to be, we're actually more productive, right? That's when we can tap into our greatest creativity, our greatest assets, our greatest knowledge base. It's not in the churning of the wheel, it's in the rest that we actually are more productive, as ironic as that may seem. So, yeah, we've got to remind ourselves we are human and we need to connect human being to human being.
Oh, I love that. And also I think grief is so transformational that actually if we allow for that being and we allow that space, I'd imagine there's the opportunity. I mean, my experience was my grief of a miscarriage was actually my exit from Formula One. But equally, I realized something that I'd been denying in myself, that this isn't my dream anymore. And actually, I probably wasn't bringing my best self into F1. But
Wow.
I equally think that there are other people where that transformation could make them show up with ever more presence, etc. If only we allow for, as you shared, that space of human being. I absolutely love that.
That's it. So before we hopped on the podcast, we were talking about this beautiful word invitation, right?
Mhm.
And life really does afford us lots of invitations, right? Now, some of us are more stubborn than others. I'm certainly in that camp. And sometimes it takes a lot of invitations to get me to see what's sometimes right in front of me. But yes, when my mom died, that was a beautiful invitation, which I didn't see at the time, right? I met grief with resistance. My entire goal the first year was to avoid it altogether, or to outrun grief. Like, I am very disciplined, determined, very focused, goal oriented. And so I said,
Mhm.
I am not gonna let this win. Like, what a silly way to look at it, but that's how I was looking at it at the time. And it didn't for a long time. And then eventually, because we know grief is lifelong, it started to manifest. These were the invitations. Invitations in my body as I started to experience random aches and pains, would go to the doctor only to hear, Mekel, nothing's wrong. Invitations in my social relationships as I was disconnecting, heightened irritability, losing friends, not connecting with people. Invitations spiritually to sit with God and actually lament what was going on as opposed to pretending that it didn't exist. And so there are all of these entry points. And if we are open to the invitation and just walk even narrowly through the invitation door, we are met with potential beauty. And I know someone's listening and they're grieving, thinking, there's no way there's beauty in this. I will argue that number one, I understand that you see it that way, and beauty does exist in it, if only the beauty of understanding your own self better than you do today. So invitations,
The powerful invitations, and
powerful
that
invitations.
that threshold when we can cross over, when we can be with it and not do
Yes,
what a lot
that's
of
right.
society wants us to avoid, numb, pull back.
Yeah.
And what I really connect into in all of your work is you bring such a softness into the
Mm,
grief work,
mm,
because actually we live, I've seen you writing about this, about the spiritual bypassing that there is, and actually we need to go through it.
yeah.
But far from it, I suppose that sort of your former self and that perspective of, I'm not gonna let this win, that almost
Yep.
that like fight spirit.
Yes.
But actually what really flows through from your writing is a real softness, a real gentleness. And
Mhm.
and I'd love for you to share around that
Mhm.
soft path through grief that we can have.
Yeah, yesterday I wrote an article focused on the importance of yielding to grief. And as I was thinking about the theme, what came to mind was what we do every day if we drive cars. And that is we approach yield signs, right? There are these moments where we're behind the wheel, we see this sign, and we all know what a yield sign means. It means to pause, to look around and survey the driving atmosphere, and then, see if any traffic is coming, and then we proceed. And it dawned on me, I said, gosh, well, what would it look like if we yielded to grief, right? Grief is not going anywhere. It's with us. It's a lifelong companion. And instead of resisting it, like, "Oh, I'm gonna slam on the gas and go straight through the yield sign," or, "I'm just gonna just stop driving altogether." Like, what would it look like if we could say, "Huh, I'm driving down the road of life and I see grief," right? I'm not gonna try to run over it, even though, trust me, I understand that temptation to wanna do that, but I'm gonna say, "Okay, I see you. Let me slow down." Right, this is where we can ground ourselves and sort of push pause, survey the landscape. Now, the landscape is what's showing up in my thoughts? Where are my feelings taking me? What information is my body communicating? We're surveying what emotions are rising to the surface. Then once we take stock of that information, now we're ready to proceed. Now the proceeding may not look the same, right? We may have to turn back around and maybe rest or maybe seek out social support,
Yeah.
maybe change the course of our day because we're feeling overwhelmed. That's okay.
Mhm.
Whatever that plan is, we proceed. And if we do that when we encounter grief, it's a softer way to live, right? It helps to lessen the suffering that we already feel, right? As opposed to not only am I suffering internally, but now I'm going to suffer because I'm pumping the gas and just
Mm.
forcing myself not to feel anything. So
Mm.
that really, again, becomes a practice that we have to partake in as an invitation.
Such a beautiful, beautiful practice, and I can really connect into that urge to pump the gas and go, right, I'm just going straight. Get me to the other side as quickly as possible.
That's
And I
right.
really connect into that because actually in that observation, that just being with it, that's where I know that my greatest transformations have come. If I'd have kind of flipped back into that fast pace, that business as usual,
Mhm.
I wouldn't have left. Well, I definitely wouldn't have left F1. I'd probably still be in corporate, still
Mm,
not be thriving,
yeah.
not listening to my body, etc. There's so many lessons that come through that
Mhm.
softening and allowing for it. And I suppose for you in your work, when you encounter people who are probably like my dear friend who also she gives me treatments for acupuncture and massage therapy. And she's always sort of remarking about what a journey it's been for me to recondition myself and to find that softer way of being. It's definitely been, I think, us working together has been about 7 or 8 years now, and I
Okay.
still find those old habits die
Yeah.
hard. So for anyone who is stuck in that real fast pace of life, what would
Mhm.
you say? How can we cultivate that practice of softening where actually our world feels like it just is spinning every day and we don't know where we can fit it in?
Yeah. So you would think that I would say, "Okay, just stop doing that," right? Like, let's just slow down. But I understand as someone who's high achieving, foot on the gas, very, very determined and disciplined that it's not that easy, to just stop doing that because there's a fear, right? If I take my foot off that gas, I know, right, the floodgate of emotion might overwhelm me, and the fear is that it's gonna overwhelm me to the point where I can no longer function. Total reality, completely normal. And so what I would recommend is that you approach this in a very systematic, gradual way, right? I'll share that my dad died in March 2020. Now, I had taken my foot off the gas already when my mom died. When my dad died, my foot was still on the gas a little bit, and at that point, this was God telling me, "Take your foot off the gas," right? And so I did do a very extreme move. I was working full time and doing private practice. I quit my full-time job within 45 days. And so it was a very rapid sort of foot off the gas experience and a softening. But if that probably is not going to be the average person, right?
Mm.
However, I would say think about day by day. Maybe it's a minute. Maybe when your alarm clock goes off, instead of you jumping up, getting out, doing all the things, you really do take stock for a moment to ask, gosh, how do I feel?
Mm.
Or maybe you take a moment throughout your day to talk to your loved one who's no
Yeah.
longer here. Just
Mm.
to acknowledge, because the relationship is still present, even though
Yeah.
the body's not here, right? Spiritually, they're still here. And so take a moment to have a conversation. It's just little bitty opportunities to connect to the grief, right?
Oh.
As opposed to saying, I'm not grieving, I'm fine, I'm good. All these things that we tell ourselves to will grief away when we know that the truth is that grief is there anyway, right? So maybe creating small moments to connect in some way. Yeah.
Beautiful. Those little moments, but
Mhm.
also that invitation, because I had that real lightning bulb moment through grief that I guess there might be people listening who are thinking, I've had that lightning bolt. I've been thinking about quitting my job or whatever it is. And equally there can be those invitations to, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember, it's so funny when, I had this thought of quitting my job. What happened was, sort of back to your point about bereavement leave, I was working full time with an organization, and as you referenced, in the United States, bereavement leave is horrible, right? There's no federal legislation around it, so it depends on the organization, but typically you're granted anywhere from 48 to 72 hours to grieve your loss and get back to work, right? So, this is a morbid joke. I want to offer that as a sensitivity warning first. My dad passed away on a Monday. If only it had been Friday. That's the joke. That's the morbid. But he passed away on a Monday. Wednesday, my supervisor at the time, no fault of her own because she was following policy, she called me because that was the 48-hour mark. And her question when I answered the phone was, Mekel, just wanted to see when you might be coming to work. Wednesday.
Oh my
My dad died
goodness.
in the wee hours of the morning on Monday. So I automatically knew in my heart that I was going to be quitting.
Hmm.
And not because of her or anything else. I had just felt, number one, physically, right? I already knew how my body tends to respond to grief. But I also had this deep knowing that I never wanted to be in a situation where I had to go hard anymore. I didn't wanna be in a situation where somebody was telling me, "I have to do this, I have to be here at a certain place." I knew intuitively that I needed to live a softer life, and so I called my financial advisor and, said, "I'm thinking about, leaving," and he was like, "Are you kidding me? You don't have anywhere near the savings to do this. This is crazy." And I did it anyway, uh,
Wow.
against my financial advisor's advice. And I'm here to say that what 5 years later, I'm still standing, and I haven't lost a meal. I still have
Mhm.
a home. So yes to my financial advisor.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are those lightning bolt moments where
Yeah.
you know within yourself that you've got to make a clean break for your
Mm.
own health, and that's important to do that.
That's a key thing, isn't it? Listen to your body, listen to the space that you need. I cannot believe that it's so short in the US. Like that is
Yeah. I know. Then now there's some organizations, there's some states that have different regulations, specific companies that I won't say, but there are some that are more compassionate and really afford people more space to breathe. But you got to think about this. When someone dies, this isn't just about emotionally hurrying up the process. You got to plan a funeral or memorial. You've got to deal with legal affairs and practical aspects of that loss. You've got to communicate about the death to other people. There's so
Mhm.
much organizing. It's like hosting the worst party ever.
Yeah.
And all that within 48 hours. It's insane to
Yeah,
really,
that is.
and then go back to work and be back on the grind, productive and focused. It makes no sense.
It makes absolutely no sense, and I'd imagine there's a lot of burnout that comes through on top of burnout that comes through that, because to your point, you can't do that all in 48 hours, so I'd imagine then you're cramming it in every waking second
Yeah.
outside of outside of your working hours.
That's
That's
right. Well, so the research in this area actually shows that people, as they're navigating these practical estate affairs, they're actually doing it on the job, and it makes sense. Like, when else are they going to do it, right? These companies are open during the day. Well, they're at work during the day, so they've got to handle those affairs at work. My business partner and I just did a whole talk on burnout and compassion fatigue, which is another thing. Like, we've got to think about the jobs we're going back to, right?
Mhm.
Some people are returning to work where they are nurturing, giving of themselves and helping other people cope with their problems. Well, gosh, can you imagine that coupled with your own grief process? Talk about
Mhm.
the fatigue that can result. So,
Wow.
just for
Wow.
information.
That's like your work through Bloomwell in the spaces. I mean, all of your work is crucial in a grief avoidant and death avoidant world and culture that we live in. But I think it's is absolutely crucial because I can imagine there's so much trauma that is just compounding, as well as the burnout and
Mhm.
everything else. So and I it also it boggles my mind because, as well as an organization, you want to foster that loyalty, that
Right.
bringing your best self. So
Yeah, well, I think that there's the old sort of unhealthy, unhelpful mantra that, like, what happens in your personal life stays at home and you come to work. But again, back to this idea, we're bringing the fullness of our humanity wherever we go, whether we are at church, whether we're at work, whether we're with friends, that's who we are. And so if you're grieving, of course you're bringing that to work. So the question is not how can we shut the humanity down? The question is how can we invite it in and all be in the space together to uplift each other so that we can be ultimately not productive from a work perspective, but productive from a human perspective, right? How can we tap into our human productivity and be the best people that God has called us to be?
oh, that's beautiful. That is so beautiful. And also, I think when it comes to grief, there's many different types of grief. There's relationships ending, there's big life changes that are out of our control. There's obviously, I know that you lost your dog Hunter as well. So
I
there's
did.
pet loss, and there's
Yeah.
so much stuff that again is just so unspoken about, and there's not that compassion and that humanity in workplaces to say, actually, we're going to go through these big moments that are just going to bring us to our knees. We just need to give people that space.
Right. Yeah. And you know what? Like, let's all allow ourselves to fall, right?
Mm.
Let's all fall to our knees. What might we discover on the ground? This morning, now this was not me distracting myself. I was listening to a podcast in preparation for our talk. And what the person was talking about was that he had studied mountain climbers. And what he discovered was that these mountain climbers, who you would think, like people who climbed Everest, you would think that they would be at the pinnacle and just feel so amazing and connected. But what he found was that a lot of these mountain climbers actually felt incredibly isolated, even though they're climbing with hundreds of people, right? There's this isolation. And where they found the most connection was down in the valley. And it was interesting in the valley, right? Number one, the water could flow, so they could get nourishment in the valley. They could all rest in the valley, and when they weren't on the mountaintop, all their energy didn't have to be focused on the grind of climbing the mountain. They could just be. And so that metaphor of, yeah, let's all fall to our knees. Let's all see what's down here. And we might actually connect with one another. Isn't that amazing?
Oh, I love that. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. Let's all
So
fall to our
profound.
knees, all connect. Oh my goodness.
Mhm.
That's so profound, so beautiful. And that is how we can bring our humanity
That's
into
right.
everything that we do.
That's right.
So, Mikkel, I could talk to you literally all day. And I feel like
Same.
there's definitely going to be a part two in the future. Definitely want to have you back as and when you wish to. But we're going to have to close out our episode shortly. And before we do, I've got one question that I ask of every single guest. And that is, and it's really inspired by me. So I was doing a lot of journaling when our daughter died in the process of that. And I used to write these little notes to myself, and it started a little practice of just notes to myself of things that I need to remember. And it was actually those lightning bolts of grief that I was like, I need to not forget these things. I need to not forget the realizations I've had about myself, what's most important, the presence, what I can hold for those moments when I'm sweating the small stuff and getting really disconnected, even though it's not that deep.
Yeah.
So I always ask of my guests, if you could write a note to either yourself in the present, or it could be any version of you in the past, from where you're sitting now, what note to yourself would you write?
Automatically, as soon as you said it, I was like, I know what I'm going to say. My note would read, Mekel, it's okay to stop fighting. Period. Love your future self. It's okay to stop fighting. Yeah. I'll quickly share. I was raised in a household with two military parents, and so I quickly absorbed the idea of doing. Two Black parents in a predominantly white world. So I was, groomed to believe, right? Like, and know you've got to work harder, smarter, longer, better. And so there was an instilling of a fight spirit, which I'm grateful for. At the same time, it has worked against me in a lot of ways. And so I would tell her it's okay to stop fighting.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's okay to stop fighting. That speaks so beautifully to all of the softness that
Mhm.
you bring in. How profound and how powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And before we complete,
Mhm.
I'd love for you to share, if anyone who's tuning in wants more of you, Mekel, in their orbit, wants to connect with you and to find out more about what you do,
Mhm.
where can they find you?
The best place these days to find me is on Instagram. My handle is at Dr Mekel, at DRMEKEL. You'll find grief education. I do lots of videos. I have Instagram lives with different conversations about grief and loss. And it's a beautiful space. And from there, you can find some free resources in my bio, and some paid resources as well to connect and learn more about grief.
Oh,
Yeah.
beautiful. Beautiful. I definitely recommend having you and that soft lens on grief
Yeah.
in anyone's orbit, particularly if obviously people are navigating grief, but also for anyone who's supporting someone else. I think that human being, I love that,
Mhm.
is so needed in this world. So
Yeah.
Dr. Mekel, for our conversation and for everything that you do, I'm so grateful to you, and I've just loved connecting and spending time with you.
Thank you, Tanya. I do a lot of podcasts, and I always love it when I feel like I'm literally just sitting in the room talking to someone. And thank you
Oh,
for having such an inviting space, because
oh.
I felt that today. I'm so grateful.
All of my gratitude to you for joining me for another Dead Conversation. Death on the Daily is edited by David Strutt. The music is Set Free by Katie Gray. And I am Tanya Wilkinson. And if you enjoyed this episode, I would be over the moon if you can rate, review, and subscribe. It really helps me to get the word out there. And if you want to say hi or to hear more about my work as a coach and death doula, including how I support my clients to navigate their death on the daily, then all of the ways that you can connect with me are in the show notes. I'll be back soon with some more Dead Conversations. And in the meantime, take good care of yourself and others.
There's a cold fire, there's a crossfire, and there's something inside, and we'll never make it, and we'll never break.